Hello, and welcome to Dissecting Philosophy with Dr. McDonald. In this episode, I'll be reading and discussing the section The Sorcerer in Nietzsche's Thus Spoke Zarathustra, and I also have a brief discussion of the film Predator from 1987 to accompany the section. So let's get started. The Sorcerer, Section 1. When Zarathustra had turned the corner around a rock, however, he saw not far below him, on the same pathway, a man who was throwing his arms about as if in a frenzy, and who finally hurled himself to flat earth on his belly. "Stop," said Zarathustra. Then to his heart, "He yonder must surely be the higher man. That evil cry of distress came from him. I will see if he can be helped." But when he ran to the spot where the man lay on the ground, he found a trembling old man with staring eyes, and however much Zarathustra tried to raise him and set him upon his legs, it was in vain. Neither did the unfortunate man seem to notice that there was anyone with him. On the contrary, he continually looked around him with pathetic gestures, like one forsaken by and isolated from all the world. Eventually, however, after much trembling, quivering, and self-contortion, he began to wail thus: "Who still warms me? Who still loves me? Offer me hot hands, offer me coal warmers for the heart, spread-eagled, shuddering, like a half-dead man whose feet are warmed, shaken, alas, by unknown fevers, trembling with sharp, icy frost arrows, pursued by you, my thought, unutterable, veiled, terrible one, huntsman behind the clouds, struck down by your lightning bolt, you mocking eye that stares at me from the darkness. Thus I lie, bend myself, twist myself, tortured by every eternal torment, smitten by you, cruel huntsman, you unknown god. Strike deeper, strike once again, sting and sting, shatter this heart. But what means this torment with blunt arrows? Why do you look down, unwearied of human pain, with malicious divine flashing eyes? Will you not kill, only torment? Torment? Why torment me, you malicious unknown god? Ha ha! Are you stealing near? At such a midnight hour? What do you want? Speak! You oppress me. Press me. Ha! Far too closely. Away! Away! You hear me breathing. You hear overjoyed my heart, you jealous god. Yet, jealous of what? Away! Away! Why the ladder? Would you climb into my heart? Climb into my most secret thoughts? Shameless, unknown thief! What would you get by stealing? What would you get by listening? What would you get by torturing, you torturer, you hangman god? Or shall I, like a dog, roll before you, surrendering, raving with rapture, wag to love you? In vain, strike again, cruelest knife. No, not dog. I am only your game, cruelest huntsman, your proudest prisoner, you robber behind the clouds. For the last time, speak. What do you want, waylayer, from me? You god veiled in lightning, unknown one, speak. What do you want, unknown god? What? Ransom? How much ransom? Demand much, thus speaks my pride, and be brief, Thus speaks my other pride. Ha ha! Me? You want me? Me? All of me? Ha ha! And you torment me, fool that you are. You rack my pride. Offer me love. Who still warms me? Who still loves me? Offer me hot hands. Offer me coal warmers for the heart. Offer me the most solitary, whom ice, alas, sevenfold ice has taught to long for enemies themselves. Offer, yes, yield to me, cruelest enemy, yourself. He is gone. He himself is fled. My last sole companion, my great enemy, my unknown, my hangman god. No, come back with all your torments. Oh, come back to the last of all solitaries. All the streams of my tears run their course to you, and the last flame of my heart, it burns up to you. Oh, come back, my unknown god, my pain, my last happiness. So, the Sorcerer. And it's not until section 2 that we find out exactly what this means. So, let's have a wee recap of where we've got up to so far. So, we've started down really a little rabbit hole, and we're continuing to dig our way further in the more we go in to part 4 here. With the section The Prophet, there was that relation into nihilism and the complete lack of any meaning whatsoever, and there being really no value or worth in anything whatsoever. And one of the main things that the Prophet said to Zarathustra was, there's no point in seeking anything anymore. And that's, of course, incredibly nihilistic, because that's seeing ultimately that there is absolutely no value and no purpose to go and search out and discover new knowledge or have any developments within whatever discipline it is at the same time. Then with the conversation with the kings, there was that relation into falsity and performance and acting, where people were only just trying to play up to the kings and such a way that would please them, but they would never be their genuine selves and never have that whole relation into what they actually meant. And then with the last section, the leech, we had that man who wanted to try and burden himself down with the leeches, which were acting like a metaphor for choosing the best way to burden yourself, and the man wanting to achieve a sort of form of enlightenment. But the whole problem with that was that he was only picking and choosing what he liked about someone else's view. So then it went into that lovely discussion about manipulation of opinions and how you can try and make someone's view fit an overall agenda, even if that original person didn't say or even have a relation into whatever was being argued for in the first place. And of course, then it went into the whole discussion about how the Nazis had manipulated and misused Nietzsche's own philosophy to try to fit their whole ideology and agenda. Then we come on to the section for the Sorcerer, and we're going even deeper down into this whole of falsity, manipulation of opinions, and nihilism, and where we suddenly have then Zarathustra, as he quite likes to do, is stumble upon people and have a conversation with them. And this time around, it's an old man that appears to be in distress. And then he has this really long airing out of his grievances, is one way of putting it. Or just a really long, poetic in style, saying exactly why he is in this state of suffering. And we find out quite quickly that he's in this state of suffering and he's tormented by an unknown God. So immediately we have a nice sort of theological tie-in for this section, because we have this whole God is tormenting me, as well as what then happens towards the end of it as well. So when we think about the very idea here of what God is, it's kind of saying, well, it's an unknown God, and it's playing off the philosophical whole idea here, because we'd have to go into then what is known is things that are in the world and what we can experience. How do we know these things? Because we can say, I know what the color of blue is because I've experienced blue. I know what a chair is because I've experienced lots of different types of chairs, and so on. You can go into the nice sort of empirical way of doing things, but when you hit against the ideas of metaphysical entities like the soul or God, then you suddenly go, well, what is my idea of what God is or what the soul is? And then it starts to become more problematic, because we don't have any specific qualities that we can try and attribute to them. And hence why you have such nice criticisms from empirical philosophers, that is, philosophers that argue we only can have basis for our understanding and knowledge from the world itself. And so it's very much a scientific style of understanding the world. We could only have that relation into the world and things we can experience, and hence why they would say, like what David Hume would criticize, Scottish philosopher from the Enlightenment period, would say, if the soul exists, show me exactly where in the body the soul exists. Because then we can see from that one example there of the soul within the body, if you said this metaphysical thing exists, but suddenly someone says, well, show me, then you hit up against that wall, of course, to say, well, I can't. And then David Hume says, well, there you go. We can't have that relation into metaphysics like what you want there. We can't account for spiritual entities and so on. So therefore, it shouldn't have a relation or effect into how we think whatsoever. And then we can go into the whole historical aspect of it. And so hence why we get into this whole idea then of God as unknown, because also you get into the deep theological style of arguments about what God is. If God, in a traditional sense, is meant to be all-powerful, all-knowing, omnipotent being, then you can't precisely attribute any specific quality to what God is, because that would then try to humanize what God is, and therefore you would take away the power of God itself. And so that's one of the criticisms against Descartes, for instance, as a little side note. When Descartes has the whole discussion in the Meditations about the nature of God, one of the criticisms against Descartes' idea of what God is precisely that it takes away from the power of God itself as all-powerful being. And so we have then, as a roundabout way of coming back to this point, in the section, this unknown God, and it's tormenting this old man. And we then have the nice relation into the biblical examples, of course, where you can say, well, at least in the traditional Old Testament styles of God, God is always in the sense of tormenting and making people suffer. And the immediate examples of that, of course, is Abraham and Isaac. And the quick refresh of that one is God commanding Abraham to sacrifice his son Isaac. And I've got the little part here from Genesis 22, where it says, when they reached the place God had told him about, Abraham built an altar there and arranged the wood on it. He bound his son Isaac and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. Then he reached out his hand and took the knife to slay his son. But the angel of the Lord called out to him from heaven, Abraham, Abraham. Here I am, he replied. Do not lay a hand on the boy, he said. Do not do anything to him. Now I know that you fear God, because you have not withheld from me your son, your only son. And so we can come back to the section then to say, well, we have this whole relation into God and God causing torment and suffering for us, where the example used is that of a huntsman. You can imagine that example there, that God is like the great huntsman, whilst humanity is like whatever game that you would like to use an example, rabbits, deer, and so on. And so what would happen after the huntsman gets his prey? Then we go into the example there. Well, then there's a ransom, because suddenly I'm your captive. And how exactly do I get out of this situation? Then you want me, all of me. And so we go back into then again that whole idea of devotion and almost like a Stockholm style syndrome there, where you become enamored with your captor in a given way and you fall in love with them. And that ultimately we can see that sort of in this given example, because when we think about the whole ideas of loving God, it's very much like it's saying there, you've got to give all yourself to God, complete belief in the whole idea of, and then you've got to have that complete unshakable faith in relation to the previous example of Abraham having that unshakable faith and complete devotion to God, and willing to do almost the most horrific act in order to display his own faith and belief in the first place. And so, in the midst of all that, of course, what is the benefit of all this devotion and faith and belief is, of course, the ultimate payoff would be argued for there, is that to say, well, you have the prospect of heaven and the best afterlife physically possible. But then, quite interestingly, we have this sort of move that then happens into wanting this unknown God to yield to him. That is, the unknown God to yield to the old man. And so that in itself is a really, really interesting move. Why is that the case? Because we have two different whole things that's going on here within the first part of the section. We have this whole aspect of faith, belief, devotion to God, and the whole sort of traditional way to view all that, where you would have that unshakable belief and complete devotion in God. Then we have that shift towards wanting God to yield to humanity. What exactly is that going on about? And it's where you have that move, at least philosophically, where we no longer accept God as an all-powerful entity or being that's omnipotent and powerful, like what we would do in traditional philosophy, but rather it's that move that's made to say, well, God is a human creation. And this view was argued for by Ludwig Feuerbach in his book, The Essence of Christianity, which was written in 1841. And there's also a fantastic article written as well on the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy for the little discussion about Feuerbach, as well as the book itself, that's well worth checking out. And the website for that is plato.stanford.edu, and then just a matter of searching for Feuerbach. And so the key thing that we could take away from all that, of course, is that we've had that significant move from God as an omnipotent being to God as a human creation. And then at the very end, we have this sort of sadness that appears where the old man wants God to come back. He wants the enemy to come back again because his happiness is suddenly all gone. And here we have sort of Nietzsche reflecting on this in a sort of contemporary way of, well, once we've had this move back to humanity again, there is this sort of lament of the whole loss of God. And of course, this whole thing goes into Nietzsche's statement itself as God is dead. Why is God dead? Is because that we no longer need God anymore. That is to say, God no longer functions in the same way as providing an absolute answer for things. Why is this the case? Because we have scientific understandings for why things occur, and it's no longer just always attributed to the power of God or that of a hateful and vengeful God for making occur whatever horrible natural disaster it would be in the world. And so from all that, from section 1, the main takeaway that we have then is that it initially has us in the role in the traditional faith, belief in God route, and then makes that move where then God is a human creation to then, in the very sort of last paragraphs of it, moving towards how there's a whole sadness also with the loss of God. So let's move on to section 2. At this point, however, Zarathustra could restrain himself no longer. He took his stick and struck the wailing man with all his force. "Stop!" he shouted at him with furious laughter. "Stop, you actor, you fabricator, you liar from the heart. I know you well. I will warm your legs for you, you evil sorcerer. I well know how to make things warm for such as you." "Leave off," said the old man, and jumped up from the ground. "Beat me no more, O Zarathustra. I was doing it only in fun. Such things are part of my art. I wanted to put you yourself to the proof when I gave you this exhibition, and truly you have seen well through me. But you, too, have given me no small proof of yourself. You are hard, you wise Zarathustra. You strike hard with your truths. Your cudgel forced from me this truth." "Do not flatter," answered Zarathustra, still excited and frowning, "you actor from the heart. You are false. Why speak of truth? You peacock of peacocks, you ocean of vanity, what did you play before me, you evil sorcerer? In whom was I supposed to believe when you wailed in such a fashion?" "The penitent of the spirit," said the old man. "It was he I played. You yourself once invented this expression, the poet and sorcerer who at last turns his spirit against himself, the transfer who freezes through his bad knowledge and bad conscience. And just confess it. It took a long time, O Zarathustra, for you to see through my trick and lie. You believed in my distress when you took my head in your hands. I heard you wail, 'He has been too little loved, too little loved.' My wickedness rejoiced within me that I had deceived you so far." "You may have deceived subtler men than me," said Zarathustra severely. I am not on my guard against deceivers. I must be without caution, so my fate will have it. You, however, must deceive. I know you so far. You must always be ambiguous with 2, 3, 4, 5 meanings, and what you just confessed was not nearly true enough and not nearly false enough for me. You evil fabricator, how could you do otherwise? You would even deck your disease if you showed yourself naked to your physician. Thus you decked your lie before me when you said, I was doing it only in fun. There was also earnestness in it. You are something of a penitent of the spirit. I have divined you well. You have become the enchanter of everyone, but against yourself you have no lie and no cunning left. You are disenchanted with yourself. You have reaped disgust as your single truth. With you, no word is genuine anymore, but your mouth is genuine. That is, the disgust that clings to your mouth. But who are you? The old sorcerer cried at this point in a defiant voice. Who dares to speak like this to me, the greatest man living today? And a green lightning flash shot from his eye at Zarathustra, but immediately he changed and said sadly, "O Zarathustra, I am tired of it. My arts disgust me. I am not great. Why do I pretend? But you know it well. I sought greatness. I wanted to appear a great man, and I convinced many, but this lie has been beyond my strength. I am collapsing under it. O Zarathustra, everything about me is a lie, but that I am collapsing, this is genuine." "It honors you," said Zarathustra gloomily, casting down his eyes. "It honors you that you sought greatness, but it also betrays you. You are not great, you evil old sorcerer. This is the best and most honest thing that I honor in you, that you have grown weary of yourself and have declared, I am not great. In that do I honor you as a penitent of the spirit. And if only for a passing breath in this one moment you were genuine. But say, what do you seek here among my forests and cliffs? And when you laid yourself in my path, what proof did you want of me? What did you test me in?" Thus spoke Zarathustra, and his eyes sparkled. The old sorcerer was silent for a time. Then he said, "Did I test you? I only seek. O Zarathustra, I seek a genuine man, a proper, simple man, a man of one meaning and of all honesty, a repository of wisdom, a saint of knowledge, a great man. For, do you not know, O Zarathustra, I seek Zarathustra." And at this point a long silence arose between the two. Zarathustra, however, became deeply absorbed, so that he closed his eyes. Then, however, returning to his companion, he grasped the sorcerer's hand and said, with much politeness and guile, "Very well, up yonder leads the way to where Zarathustra's cave lies. You may seek there him you wish to find, and ask advice of my animals, my eagle and my serpent. They shall help you seek. But my cave is big. I myself, to be sure, I have never yet seen a great man. The eye of the subtlest is crude today for what is great. It is the kingdom of the mob. I have found so many who stretched and inflated themselves, and the people cried, 'Behold, a great man.' But what good are all bellows? The wind escapes from them at last. A frog that has blown itself out too long explodes at last. Then the wind escapes. To prick the belly of a puffed-up windbag I call a fine sport. Hear that, lads. Today belongs to the mob who still knows what is great, what's small. Who could successfully seek greatness there? Only a fool. A fool would succeed. Do you seek great men, you strange fool? Who taught you to? Is today the time for it? Oh, you evil seeker, why do you tempt me? Thus spoke Zarathustra, comforted at heart, and continued laughing on his way. So section 2 then starts off with the massive curveball, as you could say, with the old man saying to Zarathustra, everything that I've just told you is a lie. And when you initially read that, you are taken aback by the fact that while you've had all this emotional investment and display and emotion and so forth by the old man, you're kind of suckered in a little bit by what he's saying, and then suddenly he goes, well, I've caught you, because suddenly everything that I've just said and all the emotion of it, you actually believed I was being genuine. And so we have that nice relation back into the section for the conversation with the kings, where they had the same problem of no one being genuine about what they were saying or believing in. And really that's, interestingly, as a note, you could say, is potentially being raised here as a problem for faith and belief, at least in a contemporary situation. And that problem is, how do we know that everyone's faith is genuine? How do we know that they're actually truly believing everything that's been said to them? Why is this all being called into question, of course, and calling people's belief and faith into question is because of that loss of God as that key power of explanation for why things occur. Once we remove that, then it starts to question the role of God also in the world and that whole relation into belief and faith. And one of the things as well that we get as to why we're led into believing people who are not genuine is sort of playing off our feelings of compassion and empathy for another person. As he says there, it's the penitent of the spirit. And the word penitent itself means feeling or showing sorrow and regret for having done wrong, being repentant, as well as a person who represents their sins and in the Christian church seeks forgiveness from God. So we both have that sense there of feeling sorrow for what you've done and wanting ultimately for your actions. But it's obviously a complete lie. And so this is why the old man is called a sorcerer, and hence why the section's called the Sorcerer, because the old man is able to make everybody feel compassionate and empathy for him. And in doing so, the man appears to be much greater than what he actually is. And so we have this relation into the old man being a straw man, basically. That is a man who doesn't really have any real value or meaning whatsoever for themselves. One definition of it is a person regarded as having no substance or integrity. And there's a great example here, to take a little sidetrack, to Plato and the discussion in his dialogue called Gorgias. And in that dialogue, it talks about this great rhetorician, which is just a really posh way of putting somebody who's able to give great speeches on topics. And this guy is called Gorgias. And so Gorgias at the time was meant to be a really popular person that people would go and pay to go and listen to. And so there's this sort of idea within Plato as well, that he's also concerned about people getting the best value for their money as well. So if you're going to go pay to listen to someone talking, then you're going to want to get the best value for your money, basically. You don't want to just go and pay to see whoever it is. You want to go and pay to see someone who's going to give you your money's worth. And so, once the discussion starts going for Gorgias, and what started to be picked away within the dialogue there is very much like the old man in this section. We have Gorgias himself able to appear as a great man who appears to know a lot about different subjects, but when it comes down to the absolute meat and bones, is one way of putting it, of the subject, or the actual knowledge of things, it's all just complete hot air. He doesn't know what he's talking about whatsoever. And for Gorgias, it's quite funny to read it as well when Socrates starts criticizing these different aspects about Gorgias. And one example that he's given is going to a doctor. And Gorgias would say, oh, I can recommend to whoever it is various different things all convincingly and so forth. But then Socrates is like, well, but do you have genuine medical knowledge about that? No. But then Gorgias replies, but I can convince the man to go to the doctor and help him in some given way in that sense. But then Socrates presses on, but do you actually know? What? Do you have any genuine medical knowledge whatsoever? No. So everything that Gorgias is saying, anything to do with medicine, is completely thrown out the window. You have no basis in medical knowledge whatsoever. So why are you even talking about anything to do with medicine? The same thing to do with, it was building a city wall, as you do back in ancient Greece. There, he says, well, do you have basically any building knowledge there? Do you have any sort of architectural knowledge or structural engineering knowledge? No, but I could talk real good about it. But then there's the whole pressing on idea there. Well, you don't know. And it's that whole point here with the old man again. The old man wants to appear as somebody who knows a lot, but it's like also that great little bit at the end. Nothing pleases Zarathustra more than to pop basically a bag that's just full of air, that there's nothing there. It's almost kind of like an Easter egg as well. Once you just break an Easter egg, there's nothing inside. And then from all this wanting to appear great, whilst not actually being great himself, there's that whole lament and sadness that the old man then has about, well, he genuinely wants to become a great person and has sought out Zarathustra for wanting to become that great person. And then we also have in the midst of that, rounding off the section, this little brief discussion about how greatness itself and the very idea of what is great has become crude in a way because of the mob. And herd mentality has ultimately diluted our sense of greatness, is a way of putting it. And so we really have no bar anymore. So it's been lowered as times went on. But what's interesting here, you can say, well, in the midst of all this falsity and deception is also a moment of wanting to seek greatness, and also the realization that what the old man has been living is ultimately that complete deception and falsity. So in a way, it's sort of saying, well, in the midst of all this, there's still that genuineness of wanting to seek meaning and wanting to seek truth again and wanting to seek value again. And it's that whole thing within the old man himself. What he is a seeker. And so then we have the contrast between the old man and the prophet. The old man wants to do seeking, whilst as the prophet said, no seeking whatsoever. And so then once we start to seek is of course that progress back into meaning and value again. And it's those points that Zarathustra makes to the old man. Even though what you're saying is a lie and disingenuous, there's also an earnest in it, in what you're saying. And also you realize the fact that your whole argument and so forth is a lie and all that's genuine. And so what is one of the ways that we're starting to move towards coming out of this whole idea is, of course, then that move towards that reinvigoration of humanity in a given way, trying to move us out of this state of nihilism. Everything that's said to be great in a given way is ultimately full of hot air. And then once we realize it's full of hot air, we can start to reevaluate our situation and start to try and then move back towards values again. And great movie, I thought, for this section to discuss in relation to what's going on is Predator from 1987, starring Arnold Schwarzenegger. And we have very brief description of what the plot is here from imdb.com. A team of commandos on a mission in Central America find themselves hunted by an extraterrestrial warrior. In a nutshell, is what Predator is about. They are a set of commandos who have initially a mission to complete, and then they complete the mission at the very start of the film, but then the extraterrestrial warrior, or the Predator, then proceeds to hunt and kill these set of commandos that are led by Arnold Schwarzenegger in the movie. And why exactly is this extraterrestrial being hunting and killing people in the first place? Its motivation is the fact is it's very much a hunter and seeks trophies, and the whole motivation is that these commandos are going to make absolutely perfect trophies for its collection. So we can take from Predator then this whole relationship between God and the old man in section 1, the hunter and the hunted. What better example to use for an all-powerful being than to relate it to an extraterrestrial one that has precisely superhuman weapons? Of course, unlike God, of course, is not seeking to directly attack and use people as human trophies there. However, we have within the midst of all this, of course, we can see or use the struggle with the commandos and Arnold Schwarzenegger's character in the movie and the Predator is sort of like humanity struggling and fighting against God. And what's interesting as well, if we take it in that style of vein, then we can see, well, what happens at the end of the movie is that, slight spoiler alert, that Arnold Schwarzenegger is able to overcome this fantastic force of these superhuman weapons that the Predator has, and is able to beat the Predator simply with human ingenuity in a way. And it's kind of interesting when you think about it like that as well. One of the things that Nietzsche says about what made humanity itself have to have the need for intellect was survival. And it's kind of interesting because you take intellect as a thing that just exists. But here we see the greatness of Nietzsche. Well, we didn't always have it. Why do we need that development? And going into that whole psychological development on an evolutionary level, why did we have to get smart? And of course, the answer to that question is you either get smart or you're going to be overpowered quite easily by animals who are bigger, stronger, faster than us. And so using our intellect, we're able to craft weapons to defend ourselves and so on. So we had to have that whole development of our intellect there in the first place. So that's an interesting little side note. But when we have then Arnold Schwarzenegger's character overcome the Predator at the end of the film, then you can say, well, that then represents also humanity overcoming the relationship with God in a given way. We no longer are subservient or determined by this powerful force that's tormenting us and making us suffer. Rather, we have now the handle and control over the situation. We have taken the power back for ourselves. And then it also quite nicely touches upon that area of greatness really there at the end of the section to say, well, we've not really got an idea coming out of what greatness is, other than it's not one where it's based upon that of the mob. We want nothing to do with the mob. Why is that? Because the bar is set very low for what greatness is. So therefore, the argument would be much more from what we have so far, to say, well, what is a thing that we can try and understand where this idea of greatness is to go? And from this, we could say, well, Arnold Schwarzenegger at the end of the movie is an example precisely of greatness, and precisely human greatness in the face of that adversity, overcoming absolutely everything against him, tremendous odds, and he's able to overcome it. In that given context, of course, we can take it out of the film and then just put it into whatever other context that you like, whether it be in the Olympics, for example, or athletes managing to have the discipline and train their bodies and so forth, or whatever sport it is as well. It doesn't have to just be the Olympics, but in that sense of overcoming the adversities and being able to compete, and competing itself is all those sort of examples of greatness because of wanting to therefore achieve and having that whole sense of achievement at the end of it as well. And we could also just say at the end of the movie for Predator as well, we also get this whole sense of just human greatness at the same time coming out of it, of how great our humanity as a species because of all the great things that humanity is able to achieve at the same time, and precisely all the things that it's able to overcome in the midst of all that. And also the same can be said about Sigourney Weaver's character in Alien in the same given way, where in Alien you have the example of, again, an extraterrestrial force fighting and systematically killing off the members of the crew. And where again at the end of Alien do we have Sigourney Weaver show that same sense of human greatness by able to use her quick thinking and how to dispose of this horrible extraterrestrial force of the alien. And again, so we have got those two lovely examples there of Sigourney Weaver and Arnold Schwarzenegger for Predator and Alien as well. So that about wraps up this episode. A lot of things covered in this episode, from the relation into faith and belief in a traditional sense to that loss of God in contemporary society, and then in the second half we had that whole relation to being false and acting in a performance again come up, where no one really is genuine in what they believe. But we also had that move towards wanting to have meaning and value again and also move towards the idea of, well, what is greatness? Many thanks for listening to the episode. I hope you enjoyed my discussion of the section The Sorcerer in Nietzsche's Thus Spoke Zarathustra. Feel free to check out my Patreon page at patreon.com/dissectingphilosophy. Feel free to tip me a coffee at ko-fi.com/dissectingphilosophy. Drop me an email at my address, dissectingphilosophy@gmail.com. And lastly, I can be found on Twitter at I am a rubberman. Many thanks for listening, and I hope you'll join me next time.